The storm reached the house before midnight. The wind pushed rain across the windows in long sheets, and the security lights on the lawn blinked when thunder rolled over the hill. Seraphine Vale stood in the hallway with a mug of mint tea, listening to the old place adjust. Pipes clicking, vents breathing, a door she hadn't closed fully nudging against its frame. She had answered 2 messages from Adrian already. Board meets at 9. Wear the navy dress. Then, minutes later, you were quiet at dinner. Are you unwell? She'd typed a reply and deleted it 3 times. I'm fine was the safest sentence in her life, and somehow the most exhausting. The tea had gone cold when the knocking started. Not frantic, not polite. 3 measured taps, close enough together to feel practiced. She set the cup on the console table, crossed the hall, and watched the monitor above the latch. The porch camera had fogged with mist. A shape stood just beyond the line of light. Tall, still, waiting. Who is it? She called, keeping her voice steady. The shape did not move. A beat passed, then a voice. Low, calm, close to the wood. Don't run. Her hand froze on the chain. Before her mind could catch up, the power dropped. Everything went black. Lights, boiler hum, the soft glow of the thermostat. The house exhaled and went quiet. For a second, the only sound was rain on stone. Then glass broke at the back of the kitchen. Seraphine stepped back from the door on instinct. Another window shattered. Boots hit tile. She turned and saw shadows pouring through the corridor. 3, 4, maybe 5 men, faces covered, moving with speed that belonged to training, not desperation. One held a flashlight and swept the beam along the baseboards. She ran. They met her at the archway. A gloved hand closed around her forearm and pulled her into the dark. A second hand covered her mouth. She bit down, tasted rubber, tried to scream, and failed. Easy, someone said near her ear, the same voice from the door. Breathe. She fought anyway, twisting, kicking. Another man yanked her wrists behind her back and cinched plastic cuffs tight. The first one pivoted to place his body between hers and the others, taking a blow meant for her shoulder. He didn't shout. He just absorbed it and turned her toward the foyer. Move, a third man snapped. We're on a clock. They lifted her, almost carried her, down the steps and into the rain. The front door stood open now. The porch light sputtered and died. She caught a flash of a vehicle parked across the drive. Dark SUV, engine idling, rear hatch raised. The man holding her steady kept her face angled away from the security camera, which might have still been recording somewhere on battery. That detail registered and terrified her. He understood angles, sight lines, how to remove a person from her own life without leaving a photo of her face. He put her into the back. The plastic cuffs dug into her skin as they strapped a belt across her lap. Another zip tie went around her ankles. He took a breath, and this time she caught his profile in the intermittent strobe of lightning. A straight nose broken once, a scar that cut a pale line through 2 days' worth of beard along his jaw. Eyes that didn't bounce or flicker. They held. He pulled a hood over her head. The world became fabric, damp and chemical. The SUV lurched forward. A radio crackled in the front. Voices coordinated streets. The turn count matched the neighborhood grid. Right at the lake road. Left at the school. Speed up, then slow down at the feeder. She tried to picture the map in her head, to catch time with the rhythm of the wipers. After 4 turns, she gave up and concentrated on breathing, keeping quiet, listening for the one voice that didn't bark orders. It came once, close to her ear when her breathing went ragged. You're okay, he said, Keep your ribs open. Slow it down. She hated that she listened. She hated that it worked. They drove for a long time on roads that sounded empty. Then gravel thudded the undercarriage. A smell of wet pine and rotting leaves made it through the hood. The SUV slowed, angled, stopped. The hatch clicked open. Hands lifted her again. Cold air slapped her face. Left side, someone said. Basement. They carried her downstairs that creaked and complained. The door shut behind them and the noise of rain softened to a muffled roar. The hood came off. A basement room waited. Cinder block walls, a portable heater glowing orange in the corner, a bare bulb hung by a wire, a metal frame bed with a thin mattress and a folded gray blanket. There were no windows. There were 2 doors, the one they'd come through, and another with a deadbolt that led deeper inside. 4 men stood around her. One was thick through the shoulders, impatience in the way his jaw ground. Another was thin, eyes moving too fast. The third had a crooked walk and a leather jacket that had seen rain for years. The fourth was the man from the door, taller than the others, lean, still. He pulled off his mask and showed her the rest of his face. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Dark hair clipped short at the sides, longer on top, pushed back and now plastered down by the storm. "Cut the ties," he said. The thick one stared at him. "Why?" "So she can feel her hands." His tone didn't rise. It was an instruction, not a debate. The thick one, and now she caught the name Morrow when the thin man whispered it, snorted, pulled a knife, and sliced the plastic from her wrists. The relief was brutal. Blood rushed back down her arms, needles of pain waking every finger. The tall man's gaze took in the marks, checked her face, dropped to her feet. "Leave the ankles," he said. "For now." Morrow stepped into her space, breath sour with coffee. "You hear that? For now. We clear?" She nodded because resistance would have been theater for the sake of theater. The tall man moved between them by an inch. It was nothing. It changed the room. "Where's the list?" the thin one asked, fussing with his phone. "In the truck," the man in the leather jacket said. "Signal's trash down here." The tall one, Kyle, the thin man called him then out of habit, took the phone and powered it off. "No phones in this room. Get upstairs. Rotate." "I'll watch the first hour." Morrow opened his mouth, found nothing worth saying to that voice, and shut it. The others filed out. The door locked behind them. Kyle tested the handle from inside as if habit was law. Then he crossed to the heater, adjusted the angle so it warmed the foot of the bed, and went to the small sink in the corner. He turned the tap. The pipes rattled. Water came. "Warehouse," he said, testing the feel of the word in his mouth like he might be changing it later. "No windows, but people pass by sometimes during the day. You won't be heard." "Is this the part where I thank you?" Seraphine asked. Her throat still tasted of rubber and rain. She made her voice dry instead of small. Dry sounded more expensive. Kale studied her for a beat. "It's the part where you figure out what gives you leverage. And what gives me leverage? You breathing." He handed her a paper cup of water. She drank and kept her eyes on his. If he wanted to watch her, he could work for it. "Do you always talk like that?" she asked. "In clipped warnings? Do you always ask questions you already know the answer to?" The heater hummed. She sat on the edge of the bed. The cuffs around her ankles kept her posture formal. He stood near the door, neither threatening nor friendly, just present. She forced herself to swallow a question that wouldn't help. Who hired you? That would be answered in time or never. What do I call you? She said instead. He thought about it and made no show of thinking. Kale. Seraphine. I know, he said. We don't pick people at random. Her pulse jumped against reason. So you picked me. We were paid. His gaze flicked to the door. The rest is logistics. Are you the leader? No. Are you the one I should be afraid of? Kale let that pass. The quiet stretched. He angled the heater toward her knees another inch. Don't test the door when I leave, he said. It makes them jumpy. When you leave, she repeated like an echo might contain choices. Someone will bring food at first light. He nodded at the gray blanket. Sleep, if you can. Panic costs oxygen. He stepped out. The bolt slid. The lock turned. The heater kept breathing orange into the small room while rain pressed against the world above. Seraphine lay back on the mattress with her hands open and palms cooling. Panic costs oxygen circled her thoughts like a drone. She counted the seconds between the water heater clicks. She learned the pattern of footsteps on the stairs and the scrape of a chair leg in the room above. She didn't cry. She measured. At some point, she slept. When she woke, a tray rested on the floor. White bread, an apple, a small bottle of water, a packet of salt. Her ankles were no longer tied. She flexed and winced and laughed once without humor. They'd cut the ties while she slept. It was a small kindness or a calculated test. Either way, it slid a needle under her skin and threaded something she didn't want. The idea that Kale passed through the room with soft steps and a knife blade, choosing not to wake her. She ate half the bread, saved the apple, and scolded herself for all the stories her mind wanted to write onto his silhouette. He's a criminal. He's not a confession. Hours blurred. The door opened. A different man put down a tray, stared at her chest like she wasn't a person, and smirked when she looked back without looking away. See you at dinner, he said through the mask. When he left, she stood and paced the 6 steps from heater to door, her bare feet catching grit. 6 steps was enough to feel human if she counted slowly. On her 4th turn, the lock clicked again. Kale's shadow cut the light. Then he stepped in and shut the door behind him, one hand on the knob as if that kept the world out. The one who brought lunch, she said. He stared. He won't again, Kale said. You can promise that? He didn't answer with words. He slid a small cloth bundle from his pocket, opened it on his palm, and showed her a ring. Not just any ring, her engagement ring, platinum and sapphire, the stone the color of a clean bruise. He held it like evidence and set it on the metal bed frame with a sound that made her skin tighten. He didn't look at the ring as if it meant anything. He looked at her and let her do the math. You want compliance, she said. I want time, he said. Time for what? To see if anyone out there thinks you're worth the money they say you are. Her laugh came out wrong. You don't believe it? I believe numbers, he said. I don't believe people. Who hired you? She asked again, because asking had never been a crime. Kale studied her face the way some people study maps. Stop trying to see how I break, he said. Save your energy for when it matters. When will it matter? When somebody decides you're leveraged for more than money. And who would that be? Kale's gaze slid to the ring again. Men who want to own the weather, he said. They pretend the rain means yes. She almost smiled at the strangeness of that answer, then stopped herself out of reflex. Less poetry, more facts. She tipped her chin toward the door. What's upstairs? Stairs, he said. You're very helpful. He didn't smile either. There's nothing up there you want to see. Define want. Kale put his back to the door and folded his arms. Eat, he said. At sundown, you'll get a curtain for the corner so you can change without eyes on you. You regulate privacy like it's a privilege. It is. Is that your law or theirs? It's the only one that works. He paused, then added, with this crew. You don't like them, she said. I don't like variables. His voice softened by a half degree, enough to register as a shift. Stay in the habit of being alive, Seraphine. He left before she could ruin the moment by asking for something he wouldn't give. Act 2. Habits of the living. The crew rotated. She learned their sounds and their smells and the way they filled the doorway. Morrow always arrived too close, like a man who had never learned what boundaries were for. The thin one, Evan, fidgeted with his phone even when it was off. The man in the leather jacket, Roke, watched her like a gambler reads cards. None of them were stupid. That was the worst part. Stupid men made predictable mistakes. These three made smart ones. Kale didn't remove his mask when the others were near, at least not where they could see him with her. In front of them, he was a part of the machine, efficient, silent, obedient to no one in particular, but engaged in the work like a man who'd done it before and would do it again. Alone, he was different by inches. Inches counted. On the third night, Evan snuck a look into the room during the midnight change and took a step across the line Kale had drawn without words. The next morning, the crew came down with a new rule. No one enters the room alone except Kale. They argued on the stairs. It ended with Roke telling Morrow to let it go, unless he wanted to sleep with broken ribs. Seraphine heard the thud of a shoulder hitting a wall and counted the cost of that decision in real terms. Kale had chosen a line to stand on. Men who picked lines lost friends. How long? She asked when Kale brought the next tray. Longer than you want, he said. Then give me something to do. He looked at the tray. Eat the apple. I meant for my mind. He considered that. Learn our schedule. I already have. Prove it. Breakfast at 7. Lunch whenever you remember to care. Dinner at 6:10, unless Morrow is sulking. And then 6:25. Evan takes the midnight turn but naps by the heater. Roke walks the perimeter twice after sundown, even in rain. You eat only when we're 2 floors away. You don't smoke. You never touch your phone here. And you keep your gun where you can see both doors. Silence tightened around them. Kale's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but calculation. He set the tray down and straightened the blanket on the bed like that task had to be done before anything else. When he looked back at her, the attention had weight. What do you do with information? He asked. Try not to drown in it. That's not an answer. It's the only one from inside a box. He nodded once as if he respected the restraint. He took the ring from the bed frame and slipped it into his pocket. You won't need that, he said. You're stealing from me now. She didn't know why she pushed. Maybe because pushing was the only control left. I'm holding it, he said, until decisions are made. By who? He didn't answer. He moved to the door, then froze when his head tilted the slightest degree left. Footsteps upstairs. A pattern different from the usual, too. Kyle killed the heater with a flip of the switch. The room cooled hard. He held up a finger, quiet, and crossed to the wall, pressing his palm against the cinder blocks like he could feel vibration through stone. The lock turned. The door opened. Roke stood there with rain on his shoulders. Behind him, another man Seraphine hadn't seen before, taller than Cale, heavier, a scar along his scalp where hair refused to grow. His eyes tracked the room in a single sweep and landed on Seraphine with interest that felt like a knife blade. "This her?" he asked. Roque nodded. "Lively." The scarred man stepped inside without waiting for permission. Cale didn't move aside. The space between them shrank to inches. Scar looked Cale up and down and grinned. "New policy," Roque said, a little too loud. "Boss wants a proof of life tonight. Video. Then we move up the timetable." Cale's jaw worked once. "Who's your boss today?" "Don't be cute." Roque's smile had too much tooth. "The buyer's contact wants something on camera. You hold the phone." Pretty boy here asks the question. Scar drifted toward Seraphine like a man who liked gravity. She held the bed frame to stay standing. Cale's gun came up between them so quickly Scar actually flinched. "No one touches her," Cale said. "She's an asset," Roque said. "We need her alive. The rest is detail. The rest is rules," Cale replied. "Touch her and you don't leave this room." Roque's gaze flicked to Scar with a warning too late to matter. Scar shouldered toward the barrel anyway. Cale moved the muzzle an inch and tapped it against Scar's sternum, friendly as a dare. Scar found the intelligence to stop. Roque rolled his eyes and dug a phone out of his jacket. "Let's go," he said, tossing it to Cale. 30 seconds. Face and name. Today's date. No tears if you can help it. He slanted a look at Seraphine like he was doing her a favor. Cale powered the phone, disabled selfie mirroring, turned off location services without looking at the screen, and started the camera. He spoke first. Voice, even. "State your full name." "Seraphine Vale," she said. "Today's date," Cale said. She gave it. "Are you being treated well?" he asked, and their eyes met, and the question sounded different than it should have. Less script, more test. She held that gaze for a second too long. Then she said, "Yes." Roque nodded as if this were an exchange of canned goods. "Perfect. Upload and scrub the original." Cale sent the file to a number he'd been given. He deleted the local copy. He powered the phone down. Scar smirked, like he'd already rewritten the chain of command in his head with his fists, and wanted to see who would stand in his way. Cale holstered the gun and stood like a wall. Roque cracked his neck. "We're moving the meat," he said. 2 days. Get her ready." "For what?" Seraphine asked. "For being traded," Roque said. "That's how this works." They left. The lock bit down. Cale turned the heater back on. The orange took a second to catch. "Who wanted the video?" she asked. "The money," he said. "Whose money?" Cale's silence was an answer with edges. He rubbed his thumb over the scar on his jaw, like the memory of the blade lived there. When he spoke, he chose plain truths he could afford. "This crew used to do grab and drops," he said. 12 hours, 24 maximum. In, out, clean. Now they've got a client who wants control, not speed. They're not built for that. And you? "I'm built to end things clean," he said. "You don't look clean." He almost smiled then, just a flicker. "No," he said, "I don't." That night, Seraphine listened to Rain and tried to imagine a version of this story in which she walked back into her own house wearing the ring that sat in Cale's pocket. The only version she could find that wasn't a lie involved a police station and a room with glass, which meant the truth was something else. She slept with her hand on the bed frame, like steel could substitute for faith. On the 4th day, the food changed. Soup instead of bread. Real coffee instead of instant. She hated that the small kindnesses worked. She hated that at dusk she waited for the sound of Cale's steps without admitting that was what she was doing. She hated that his absence made the room colder. "Do you always calibrate people?" she asked when he came. "I calibrate outcomes," he said. "You make that sound different." "It is." "Do you have a family?" "No." "Anyone who would care if you didn't come back from a job?" He let that hang, so long she thought he wouldn't answer at all. "A brother," he said finally. "He's in a place better for him if I'm somewhere else." "You're protecting him by staying away." Kyle shrugged. "Or by not making him a target." He shifted his weight, winced, and tried to hide it. She caught the micro-movement. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "That's the least convincing sentence in the world," she said and stepped forward. "Stay there," he said, but it didn't come out sharp. It came out tired. She ignored him, closed the distance, and took his wrist. He didn't pull away. The skin there was warmer than it should have been, and under his jacket the fabric felt tacky with dried blood. She pushed the sleeve up. A strip of gauze clung to his forearm, the edges stained through. She looked up at him. He looked down at the floor as if it had betrayed him. "Sit," she said. "That's not—" "Sit," she repeated with the tone that made charity boards stop whispering and listen. He sat on the edge of the bed like the world had changed hands. She found the alcohol wipes by the sink, the spare gauze, the tape. He held his arm out without comment. When she peeled the bandage free, he didn't hiss. He didn't flinch. He just watched her fingers move as if they were getting away with something. "Knife?" she asked. "Door frame," he said. "Stupid angle?" "From who?" His silence told her what she needed to know. Someone had gotten jumpy coming through a space Kale meant to control. Someone who would not jump twice. She cleaned the wound. She wrapped it. He rolled his sleeve down and didn't say thank you. She didn't want him to. Gratitude would have made this a transaction. It wasn't. It was something else she didn't want to name. When she stepped back, his hand closed around her wrist before she could stop it. Not tight, not possessive, just there. His eyes met hers with nothing in the way. The room shrank to the space between them, to the heater's hum, to the taste of rain drifting through old mortar. "Seraphine," he said quietly, like the name was a decision. "When the door opens and I tell you to move, you move. No looking back. No questions. When? When you hear me lie. To who?" "Everyone." The bolt thunked upstairs, voices overlapping, heavy with news. Kyle stood in one motion, all that quiet turning into form again. He checked the gun, checked the second gun, checked the knife she hadn't seen. The door swung in. Roque filled the frame, jaw tight, smile gone. "Change of plan," he said. "Buyer wants transport tonight. We move at 1, bad weather," Kale said. "Then drive slow." Kale glanced at Seraphine, and she saw it. She heard it in the way his tone slid 1 degree toward casual. "When you hear me lie. We'll need 2 vehicles," he said, "and fuel." "Done," Roque snapped. "Maro's on it." Kale nodded like that was good news. Seraphine did not move. Somewhere under the floor, thunder rolled toward the coast. Act 3. The turning. They moved her at 1:10 in the morning. Hoods, gloves, a blanket that felt clean thrown around her shoulders like it was December. Kale walked at her left elbow, a half step behind, his fingers brushing the blanket only when the stairs creaked. The parking lot smelled of wet iron. Engines idled, doors opened. The same SUV waited with a second truck idling beside it. "Back," Roque ordered. "Kale with me." Maro with Evan. Kale opened the rear hatch and placed his palm against the frame like a man touching a rail before a jump. Seraphine climbed in. He leaned close, his mouth near her ear, and said in that same measured tone, "If I say down, you fall. If I say left, you roll left. Understand?" "Yes." "Good." Roke climbed in front. Kale slid in beside her, the heat of him steady without crowding. The SUV pulled out, tires chewing gravel, and took the road in a direction she couldn't place. 15 minutes in, headlights appeared behind them. The second vehicle. The radio clicked with Roke's voice and then Morrow's. Kale answered like air. A mile later, Kale lifted his wrist and looked at his watch. The habit felt military, not criminal. He pressed a finger against an earpiece she hadn't seen and said, casually, "Fuel light's on." "It's not," Roke said. Kale didn't argue. He just said, "Left." Roke took the left. The second SUV followed. Trees closed in over the road. The rain changed pitch. The engine downshifted for a hill, then up again for a rise. Kale took a breath like he had timed it. "Down," he said. She dropped her weight sideways, and in the same second Kale punched his elbow into Roke's seatback and drove his shoulder into the man's headrest. The SUV twitched. The horn stuttered. Kale's hand shot to Seraphine's shoulder and shoved her flat as glass shattered beside her cheek. He was out of the hatch before she could breathe twice, dragging her with him, rolling them underneath the rear bumper while the second SUV overshot and fishtailed on the slick road. "Move," Kale said against her hair. Not gentle, not cruel. Command that sounded like oxygen. They went into trees. Branches slapped her face. Mud sucked at her shoes. Shouts broke behind them. Morrow's voice, high with shock. Evan explaining to no one what had just happened. 2 gunshots snapped the air too close. Kale pulled her down behind a blow-down trunk and put her hand on the wood. "Stay," he whispered. "Hands on the bark. Keep your chin down." He rose into a crouch and moved left without sound. Another shot cracked. A curse followed. Kale came back low and grabbed her wrist. "Left," he said. She rolled left. Her shoulder hit a root. A bullet chewed last year's leaves where her hip had been. "Run," Kyle said, and this time the word was a small mercy. She ran. They broke out onto a service road and crossed it on a diagonal. Kale stayed 1 pace behind and 1 pace to her left, between her and the line of headlights slashing the trees. A fence appeared ahead, 8 feet of chain link. Kale hit it like he had hit iron all his life, went up, hooked a toe, and hissed, "Hands." She jumped, grabbed the diamond cut of the metal, and climbed. Her palms tore. It didn't matter. On the other side, she fell into wet grass and rolled. Kale landed beside her and pushed her flat with his forearm as light swept across the fence. "Stay," he said again. Then he reached under the hem of her jacket, found the waistband of her pants with professional detachment, and slid a small knife into the fabric from the inside, the handle sitting along the line of her spine. "Don't drop it," he said. "Don't show it. Don't use it unless I'm not breathing." "What if—" "Don't," he said, and took her hand and pulled. They moved along the fence, crouched, bodies close to the shadow line where grass became forest again. A siren somewhere far away rose and faded. The second SUV roared, then fired, then died. Voices scattered. The rain made even the night seem full of static. Kale guided her down a slope, into a drainage ditch, up the far side, and through a stand of small trees whose branches tried to hold them in place. He wasn't winded. He wasn't loud. He was the same as in the basement, exactly what the job required, plus 1 inch more. They reached a maintenance shed behind a municipal yard. Kale tested the door. Locked. He used the knife she hadn't seen and made it unlocked. Inside, the air smelled like oil and wet rope. He shut the door, slid the latch, and stood still until their breathing fell into something like a rhythm. "Hands," he said. She held them out. He looked at the blood on her palms and nodded. As if this proved a point neither of them had argued. He found a roll of paper towels and a bottle of something that burned like truth and poured it over her cuts. She didn't make a sound. He wrapped her hands and looked at her like that too. Meant something. "Time?" she asked. 3 minutes, he said. "Maybe less." "For what?" "For them to get smart." "Are we going back?" "No," he said. "We're going forward." "Where's forward?" "A place I haven't burned yet." He checked through the slatted vent. "Stay close to my left shoulder when we move. If I stop, you stop. If I push, you drop." "I understand." He exhaled once. "Steady." "Good." They left by the rear, slipped along a line of dumpsters, and cut into another stand of trees as sirens converged on the road. Cale's hand found the back of her jacket when the slope turned slick. He didn't haul, he guided. At the fence on the far side, he boosted her with both hands, then went up after like gravity applied to other people more. They came out on a service lane beneath a retired rail bridge and followed it under the concrete. The storm found them wherever they went. It soaked their hair, found their backs, made their chests work harder. It wasn't theatrical. It was inconvenient. Cale moved like a solution. At the far end of the bridge, a rusted gate hung crooked. Beyond it, a single-lane road ran toward a strip of light that had to be a gas station, the kind that stayed open for truckers and ghosts. Kyle took her elbow. "We have a minute," he said. "Maybe less. Keep your head down. If anyone speaks to you, cough. Don't share your face with the cameras longer than you have to." She nodded. The station's neon open sign bled red into the puddles. A solitary driver leaned against a pickup, smoking. A teenage clerk watched a phone at the counter. Cale pushed the door and the bell overhead did its brittle work. "2 ponchos," Cale said, grabbing the first pair off a rack. 2 baseball caps, 2 bottles of water, 1 pair of sunglasses, 1 disposable phone. Cash. He put everything on the counter. The clerk glanced up and down and yawned. Cale put down a $100 bill, then another. "Keep the change," he said. And the kid smiled like money was still a surprise. In the bathroom, Seraphine scrubbed her face and dried it with the end of her shirt. The mirror gave her a stranger. The poncho changed the line of her shoulders. The cap hid the shape of her hair. When she came out, Cale was waiting with a set of car keys he hadn't bought. "You asked," he said, "with incentives." They crossed the lot to a mud-brown sedan. Cale opened the passenger door for her like they were on a different errand, then went around and slid behind the wheel. The engine turned over once like it might refuse, and then agreed to work. He checked the mirrors. He checked the rear view. He checked her hands and the way she held them like she was trying not to bleed on the upholstery. "Seatbelt," he said. She clicked at home. He pulled onto the road like he'd been born in that car. Behind them, the storm decided to be serious. "Who pays you, Cale?" she asked, eyes on his profile. "No one anymore," he said. "That's not how this works." "It is now. You'll be hunted. I know. By them or—" She couldn't make herself say Adrian without spitting it. The name stuck in her throat. "All of them," Cale said, saving her the word. "You have enemies you don't know, and friends you don't want." "Which are you?" "Neither," he said. Then after a beat that felt like a choice. "For now." Act 4. Fires in the rain. They drove north by old routes locals used when they didn't want toll cameras counting their lives. Kyle kept to the shoulder when headlights appeared, passed slow when trucks drifted, slowed to a crawl to let patience act as disguise. Before dawn, he left the highway for a 2-lane road that ran along low marshes. Mist hung low over the water. A heron lifted and turned, dark against darker. He found a safe house a county over, a leftover hunting cabin with a roof that held in locks that spoke only once. Inside, he checked the rooms the same way he checked doors, as ritual. He didn't tell her to sit. He set a towel on a chair and nodded at it like that was language. She sat. He turned his back to give her the kind of privacy that existed between strangers with an agreement. She peeled the poncho off, the shirt beneath plastered to her skin, and fought the tremor in her hands. Not fear. The slow return of all the systems that had burned hot. Cale set a pot on the stove, lit the burner, and stood there while it warmed like a soldier who'd learned to find shelter inside tasks. When the water boiled, he poured it over 2 tea bags taken from a drawer that held batteries, nails, and a single photograph with the face turned down. He handed her a mug. Their fingers brushed. Heat traveled through bone. "They'll come here?" she asked. "No," he said. "This place isn't mine." "What is?" Cale looked at the blank wall. "Gear," he said. "Maps, schedules, the next 5 minutes. And after that? After that is noise." She drank. It wasn't mint. It tasted like something you made do with. She set the mug down, stood, and stepped into his space before she could talk herself out of it. He didn't back up. His eyes flicked to her mouth, not to her cheek or her throat, like a man playing a longer game. Just there. "I know the difference," she said, "between mercy and leverage." "I don't have time to convince you," he said. "You don't have to." She lifted her hand and rested her palm against his jaw, where the old scar interrupted his beard. "You already did." Something gave. Not a wall. Not a vow. Whatever a man builds inside so he can go to sleep knowing what he has done. Cale's breath left his chest with a sound that was almost relief, and his hands found her waist like he had been teaching himself to do it wrong for years. He kissed her without theater. It wasn't soft. It wasn't cruel. It was the balance between the two. The place where a person chooses and keeps choosing while the weather changes its mind outside. He pulled her close and she went, and the heat in her hands and the ache in her shoulders and the weight in her chest found a shape that wasn't grief. They moved without talking for a long time because words would have made it an argument with the past. He learned the line of her spine with his palm. She learned the tension in his neck with her mouth. When they stopped, it was because the stove clicked and reminded them that things burn. He turned the burner off and stood with his hands on the edge of the counter, head bowed. She stepped behind him, slid her arms around his middle, and rested her cheek between his shoulders. "This doesn't change what we have to do," he said. "No," she said. "It changes why." He turned and put his forehead against hers and let his hands hold her face like it was the only thing he trusted. "Listen to me," he said. "We have to move again before noon. There are cameras on the highway. There's a private network Adrian buys access to when he needs to know where a car has been. We'll leave this one by the ferry, take a bus 2 towns over, and shift more times than feels sane." She wanted to tell him that the word Adrian sounded wrong in his mouth because it meant something she hadn't allowed before. She had brought the wolf to her door long before any man broke it. "Why me?" she asked. "Why not any woman with a name on a party list?" Cale's mouth flattened. "Because you're liquid. he said. Because your father left not just money but equities people can move without telling a bank which artery they're cutting. And because Adrian can smile and make it look like grief. The blow landed where she'd expected to be hollow. It found something hard. I'm going to put him in the ground, she said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The promise sat there like a knife on a table. Kyle nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition. Not today, he said. Today, we survive. They left at 11, carrying nothing that told a story. On the bus, she watched him watch reflections, doors, hands. When a man 2 rows back stood 3 times without purpose, Cale shifted his seat by 2 inches to put his shoulder between the man and the aisle. When a woman cried softly into her phone near the rear, Cale took inventory of who looked away and who looked like they wanted to help. He wasn't a hero. He was a habit that had learned to care about outcomes and nothing else. They changed buses twice, rented a car for 3 hours, abandoned it behind a diner shaped like a train car, and walked the last mile to a motel that smelled like disinfectant had lost its war with memory. Cale took the room nearest the exit and left the chain off. That night, danger felt close enough to breathe. Their restraint broke again, not out of stupidity, but because the world had handed them a narrow window where the only honest thing they could do was live inside it. It wasn't polite. It didn't pretend to be love promised or vows. It was heat and trust, and 2 people building a shelter out of skin while the storm tried to recolor the day. After, he lay on his back staring at the ceiling as if maps were painted there in invisible ink. She traced the veins on his forearm with 1 finger and felt the impulse to ask for promises she had no right to demand. She made a smaller request instead. Tell me one true thing about you that isn't a weapon. He thought for a long time. I wanted to be a surveyor, he said. What? Topography. Land. The way a grade changes a road. The way water decides where it's going. She smiled in the dark. You're doing that now, she said. It's just people instead of hills. His laugh was quiet and real. That's worse, he said. People pretend. Not always. No, he agreed, brushing a hand over her hair. Not always. Act 5. The Pursuit. They reached the coast on the 3rd day. Salt changed the air. The horizon flattened. Kyle parked the last borrowed car 2 blocks from the harbor and led her through alleys that smelled of fish and old bread. Boats clinked against their moorings and gulls argued over nothing. He bought 2 tickets on a ferry that ran to an island with more houses than permanent residents and more sheds than law. He didn't ask for names. He didn't offer any. On the ferry, Seraphine kept her head down and watched shoes. Cale watched the space where sea ended and sky began. 2 hours, he said. We'll disappear for a day, then call the one person I trust to get you a clean line out of here. You trust someone. Enough, he said. For this. Who? He didn't answer. She didn't press. The deck pitched and slung spray. A child laughed and then cried. A man coughed into a fist and looked surprised when no one looked back. Halfway across, Cale's phone vibrated once in his pocket. Not the burner. The other. He took it out and looked at the screen as if it had bitten him. He didn't unlock it. He watched the pattern of numbers that meant a certain thing only to him. His mouth flattened. What? She asked. Adrian knows the shape of our route, he said. Or he's guessing and getting lucky. He slid the phone back. The island's no good, he decided, as if speaking it made a plan. We get off and buy back onto the return with cash. We take the first bus south. We vanish where the cameras are bored. Where's that? A place with more lives than names, he said. Border towns. Industrial sprawl. the edges of maps. They did what he said. Off the ferry and back on with a lie about a lost set of keys and a shrug that looked expensive. Back on land, away from the harbor, into the bus station's old stale air. While Cale bought tickets from a clerk who looked like she could survive fire, Seraphine went to the restroom and washed her face. When she looked up from the sink, a woman stood behind her in the mirror. Not a woman. A girl. 17 maybe. A freelance employee of no one. She looked at Seraphine like a cat that had learned how knives worked. "You're on a camera," the girl said. "Everyone is," Seraphine said, drying her hands. "Not like this," the girl said. "You've got eyes on you with money behind them." Seraphine's stomach went cold without her skin changing temperature. "Who are you?" "Someone who will sell your picture for a price," the girl said, backing up. "Unless you give me a better one." "How much?" "400, the girl said, with the cruelty of the honest. Seraphine took the cash from the inner pocket of the jacket Cale had given her and handed it over without counting. "What do you see?" she asked, keeping her voice flat as water. "2 men, 1 woman, the girl said. "The man with the wrong suit is running the show. The other one has a head like he lost a fight with a bottle. They don't smile. They don't look around. They look at doors Morrow and Scar. And somewhere beyond them, the teeth of the man who'd written this story with her name on the first line. Adrian." Seraphine stepped out and found Cale as if nothing had happened. He saw everything anyway. "Problem?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. He nodded. "Soon then." "Soon," she agreed. They boarded a southbound bus at dusk. Cale took the aisle seat, Seraphine the window. When the bus pulled out, Morrow stood under the overhang outside, watching through rain that had started again. He didn't chase the bus. He took out his phone and called someone, smiling like a man dialing his own future. Cale saw him, of course. He watched without moving a muscle and only said, "We'll need to get off early." "How early?" "Now." He pressed the button. The driver glared in the mirror and pulled to the curb. They stepped down into wet and crossed the street into a grocery store, where neon hummed and doors sighed open and closed. Cale walked the aisles like a man who owned nothing and needed nothing, and still could get through a winter with a bottle of water and a loaf of bread. In the back, near the loading dock, he pushed open a fire door. An alarm didn't sound. He held it. She slid through. The alley smelled like rot and relief. A car idled there, not theirs. Too clean, too quiet. Cale froze and Seraphine stopped because he stopped. The rear door of the car opened. Adrian Locke stepped out into the alley in a suit that didn't belong to alleys. "Hello, Seraphine," he said, like this was a cocktail hour. Cale moved without warning and without a sound, placing himself fully between them. Adrian lifted his hands as if that would change where bullets go. "Easy," Adrian said, to Cale, to the night, to the part of himself that believed he had already won. "No heroics." "You shouldn't be here," Cale said. "On the contrary," Adrian replied. "I should be wherever my property has been taken." He tipped his head and studied Seraphine, without shame, without heat. "You look tired." She wanted to throw the word back at him like a bottle. "You paid them," she said, because sometimes naming a thing took power from it. "Of course," Adrian said, and his smile never reached his eyes. "If I'd known what an interesting man you'd meet in the process, I might have asked for a discount." Cale's weight shifted. The air in the alley thickened. Somewhere a door slammed and a dog barked and a siren wailed, because that's what cities do when you need them to be quiet. Adrian dropped his hands. "This is how it will go," he said. "You step aside. I take her home. I make the problem disappear, and you go back to whatever swamp you crawled out of." Cale didn't move. "No." Adrian's smile did not change. His left hand twitched. A shadow moved at the corner of the alley where Seraphine couldn't see faces, only shapes. Cale's gun was in his hand without her seeing him draw. "Run," Cale said quietly, and for the first time since the hallway at the house, the word didn't sound like a command. It sounded like a gift. She didn't run. She stepped closer to him and said, "Left." He took half a step, fired twice, and the shadow at the corner folded. Adrian's expression cracked. The clean lines of his face showed the boy under the suit for 1 second, the one who had learned that money could make doors open and close whenever he decided they should. Then his mask set again and he gestured. 2 more men entered the alley from the far end. Cale grabbed Seraphine's arm and pulled her through the loading dock. They ran. The grocery store became aisles of light and rustling paper. They cut through dairy into frozen, slid behind a rolling rack of cereal, and out into the night through a door labeled "Employees Only." Adrian's footsteps didn't follow. He wasn't built for running, he was built for pointing. Cale drove them 3 blocks on foot, and then 10 in a stolen truck that smelled like hay. He didn't speak until the city became a smear in the side mirror. "He'll be at the coast tomorrow," Seraphine said, because some men didn't let other people finish their stories. "I know," Cale said. "Then we go where he can't buy permission." "There's no such place," Cale said. "But there are places where money takes longer to get dressed." "Then take me there." He did. Act 6. The last morning. They reached the shipyard before dawn. The air had that metal taste that comes with old iron and old promises. Cranes stood against the sky like skeletons. Rain fell because the world had decided that was what it did now. Cale led her through stacked containers to a doorway with no door. Inside, the space felt abandoned and used at the same time, like someone had been there yesterday and 10 years ago, depending on where your eyes landed. "Here," he said, handing her a jacket that didn't smell like anyone yet. "Stay behind the forklift if you hear voices. If you don't hear my voice, crawl. If you can't crawl, hide. If you can't hide, fight." "Your instructions are very thorough." "They're practice," he said. "I'm better when I've practiced." "You're better because you're better," she said. He didn't answer, because he didn't accept compliments he couldn't prove. He checked sight lines, checked exits, checked the way the sound of rain bounced off steel. He checked his guns again. He slid the knife he had given her earlier into the sheath near her spine, like he trusted her to remember it was there. They didn't have to wait long. Headlights cut across the gap between containers. Doors opened. Voices entered and spread out with the confidence of men who had been told the world belonged to them this hour. Adrian called her name once, like a host. "Seraphine." Cale set his palm against her back, steady pressure, and moved toward the sound. He stepped out first because that is what he would always do if given the chance. "Let's end this," he said. Adrian stood with 2 men on his left and 1 on his right. Scar, Morrow, and a 4th she didn't know with a rifle he didn't deserve. "So dramatic," Adrian said. "You could have been rich." "I'm tired," Cale said. "That's different." "Of what?" Adrian asked, as if the question interested him. "Of men like you," Cale said. Adrian sighed. "This was a transaction. You turned it into a story." He nodded at Morrow. Morrow raised his gun. Cale fired first. Morrow folded with surprise on his face. Scar flanked right. The man with the rifle panicked and shot into the ceiling. Sparks broke and fell. Rain sounded louder for a second, then quieter again. Cale moved like he'd trained for the edges of these moments, not the center. He never stood where someone had just seen him. He never shot twice at the same time. He never wasted breath. Adrian drew a pistol with hands too clean and fired wildly. The shot took a bite out of the forklift's tire and ricocheted. Seraphine pressed down into the grease and waited for the whistle that meant a bullet close enough to name. It never came. Scar came around the forklift with a grin that showed too much gum. Seraphine slid along the floor and brought the knife up in a motion that felt like memory. Scar blinked down at the handle sticking out of his thigh and laughed once and reached for her neck. Cale's second shot took him through the upper chest and turned the laugh into a long breath he didn't finish. "You shouldn't have come," Cale told him, like an apology, and then he turned to find Adrian. The last man standing beside them was the one with the rifle, who had realized loyalty wasn't a sacrament and had started to turn toward the light. Adrian shot him in the back without looking, and the man died of surprise. "Pathetic," Adrian said. "Agreed," Cale said, and stepped into the open, because some endings require a witness, even if it's only the sea. Adrian aimed with both hands this time. The muzzle didn't shake. He had found his hate, and it steadied him. He put the front sight on Cale's chest. Cale put his front sight on Adrian's sternum. For 3 heartbeats, the world balanced on 2 bits of machined steel. Then both men fired. Adrian missed by an inch and broke a crate. Cale didn't miss. Adrian staggered, tried to make his face again, failed, and kept standing as if stubbornness could outrun blood. He raised the pistol one more time. Seraphine saw the angle and what it meant, and she did the stupid, correct thing at the same time. She stepped between them. Cale moved faster. He took the second bullet into his side instead of her shoulder, fired once more, and put Adrian onto his knees. Adrian looked at the floor like it had betrayed him, then tipped sideways and stopped moving. Silence entered. It didn't stay. Sirens lived on the far edges of the morning, curious as crows. Cale went down onto one knee and then another and sat back against the forklift tire. His hand stayed steady for one more reload before the blood running down his side argued that this next magazine would likely be theoretical. Seraphine crawled to him, hands already pressing against the wound. The blood came hot, then warm, then less. "Don't," he said, but it wasn't a command. It was grief. "You can't leave me here," she said, and hated the child in the word me. "Not like this." He blinked slow. "You'll be okay." "Liar." "Once," he said. "I lied once." And she laughed because he would count it like that at the end. She pressed harder. He hissed and smiled at the same time, like a man who'd just remembered the punchline to a joke from a long time ago. "Listen to me," he said. "You walk to the end of the row. You turn right. There's a door with blue paint. You knock 3 times and say you're out of time. He'll know who?" "A friend enough," he said. "He'll keep you quiet until the rest of the noise goes home." "I'm not leaving you," she said. "You're not," he said, and looked around like he wanted to put his hand on the sea and make it do something decent. "You're going forward." "Cale." He lifted his hand and touched her mouth to stop the words. It wasn't romantic. It was efficient. "You made me remember," he said. "That's not nothing." "We could go," she said, as if saying it made it possible to stand up and walk. "There's always another road." "Not for me," he said, and the relief in his voice broke her. "It's okay." "No. It is," he said, like a fact again, and the effort of making it true took the last piece of him he could give. She put her forehead against his and breathed every breath she had left into him until the shapes of the sirens became real, and the air changed and the edges of the world sharpened because other people were arriving. She folded his hand around the knife handle at her back like a strange sacrament and kissed his mouth, which had never lied to her even when he'd wanted to. His eyes closed while she was still there. She stayed with him until the sea got louder than the rain. Then she did what he told her to do. She walked to the end of the row. She turned right. She knocked 3 times on a blue door that looked like all the others and said, "I'm out of time." The door opened. A man with old eyes stepped aside. "Inside," he said, quickly. She went where the living go when they don't know how. Epilogue: The sea takes what it's owed. Months later, when Winter learned how to ask properly, Seraphine stood on the public pier with a paper cup of coffee going cold in her hands. The wind cut. The water did what water has always done, came and left and came again. She wore no ring. She had a different name that worked at the grocery store and the bank. A pair of gulls dropped to the rail and argued the way birds do, like everything mattered and nothing did. She set the cup down and took a small envelope from her coat pocket. Inside was a photograph the Blue Door man had given her the day she left his safe room. It showed a boy with a smile that reached his eyes and a map folded in his hands, as if roads were a language he already spoke. She folded the photograph back along the crease that had been made by someone else's hands. She slid it into the sea and watched the paper take on water and sink. Not dramatically, just honestly. "He wasn't my captor," she said out loud, because sometimes you have to tell the air a thing so you can live inside it. "He was the man who set me free." The wind took the words and put them somewhere she would never find again. That felt right. She turned her collar up and walked back along the pier, counting boards under her feet because the habit of measuring had outlived the reasons for it. When she reached the end and stepped onto the street, the sky decided to learn a different gray, and the day went on with or without her. She let it.